everyone, and welcome to part 4 of our 11-part series, The Long Road of Recovery. My name is Brad Sarosky, and today we will be talking about scheduling, goals, and planning. This will be a short video around the importance of those things in recovery. So let's get started. Leading up to my recovery, there was really no scheduling to my days at all. The only real plans I had for the day was finding my way to the liquor store, finding a bottle of vodka, and then finding my way back to my house. So needless to say, there wasn't a whole lot of scheduling that was going on throughout my day. However, as I started my recovery and started to go through the recovery program that I was involved with, they started introducing scheduling back into my life. And I found this to be a very, very important part of my recovery. I always go back to that saying, idle hands are the devil's playthings. And I know, like I mentioned before, when I was using, I didn't have anything healthy booked throughout my days. As a matter of fact, I didn't have anything booked through my day at all except for drinking. So when I started out in my recovery, I quickly noticed that as soon as I became bored, I started to think about drinking. I started to think about, well, what did I used to do? I fell back into old habits. And I started to think, oh, I want to drink. So what I realized early on is that it was very important for me to set up a healthy schedule throughout my day. When I had a schedule in my day, it really prevented that boredom. So early on in my recovery, I was fairly strict about what my schedule looked like. As a matter of fact, I would almost lay it out hourly or by the morning, afternoon, and evenings. So what a day might look like to me in my scheduling was I would set my alarm. I would get up at 6 o'clock. The first thing I did back then, I was a smoker. I would walk to my kitchen, make myself a cup of coffee, have a cigarette. Then I would finish my coffee, usually finish another cigarette, shower, have breakfast, get ready. I started my work at 8 o'clock, so I knew at 8 I went to work, and I knew I wouldn't be home till 4:30. So that allowed me to have that 8 to 4:30 spot fairly filled. There wasn't a lot of boredom in there. Now, if I was not working and in recovery, I would probably suggest to someone to put some healthy things in there, maybe some exercise, reading, if you enjoy television, maybe go for walks. Maybe meetings or groups throughout the community, an AA meeting, a group support meeting throughout the day. But for me, I was scheduled up till 4:30, so that was good. At 4:30, I would get home. I worked in a chemical plant, so I was usually fairly dirty, so I'd have a shower. I would then make myself supper, and evenings were always terrible for me because from the very beginning of my addictions, I always used in the evenings. You know, I'd get home from work. When I started out early in my addiction, I'd get home from work, and that's when I would start drinking. Towards the end, I just drank all the time, but evenings were rough for me. So I made sure that after supper, I had a plan. I would finish my supper. I would do my dishes because cleanliness had become a very important part of my life, as well as personal hygiene and everything else. And then I would go to the gym. For me, the gym was a thing. It was we talked about in the self-care video about finding things that help you physically. The gym worked for me, and it still does to this day. So I would go to the gym, I would have a workout, I would come home, I would watch a little bit of television, have a snack, and go to bed. And this is what the weeks looked like for me. Weekends were a little different. I had my daughter every second weekend, so I knew those weekends were filled up. But what I had to do is I had to find stuff that worked on the weekends that I didn't have my daughter. So this is an important part of recovery, is scheduling stuff in advance so you're not setting yourself up for failure. If I knew I had an open weekend, I would schedule a trip to see my friends that were in recovery. I would schedule some time at my parents' house. I would schedule time with people who supported me. Maybe I'd go see my sisters and their kids. It's very important to remember when you're scheduling stuff that you don't overdo it. But if you struggle with the boredom piece, if you struggle with the idle hands piece, then it's very important to make sure that you're filling your days fairly full of healthy activities. One thing I think it's very important to mention, and one thing that I found early on, is to make sure that you don't overdo it with the scheduling though. I found that I was almost making my days chaotic. I was almost addicted to the schedule. Sometimes I would put so much in my day that it would almost be an impossible task to get it all done. And then if I couldn't get it all done, I was frustrated. So I think it's important to remember that, you know, you can leave some open spots in your day. And if you find that have some things that you can replace the boredom with. If you find all of a sudden that you have 2 hours and you're getting bored, have something that works for you. Maybe it's a television series you enjoy. Maybe it's a book you can quickly pick up and read. Things like that that can squeeze into the spots, but don't overschedule yourself. I often joke to people now that I almost became addicted to chaos because I would put so much stuff into my day that from the time I woke up till the time I went to bed, I was running myself ragged, and that's not healthy either. So schedules are really important in early on recovery, and I'm just going to make a couple of quick suggestions around some things that you can do as far as setting up your schedules. Now, most cell phones now come with a calendar app where you can use your schedule. It works great. I used to do a printed out piece of paper where I would write out what things I would do throughout the day and almost have timelines for them. That worked really well for me as well. And like I said a little earlier, just remember, don't let the schedule completely control you. There's things on the schedule that you'll have to do, like work and certain tasks, but don't let that schedule overrun your life. Make sure that there's healthy boundaries set around your schedule as well. Once I kind of had my schedule somewhat in order when I was in my recovery program, when I started being able to get up at a certain time, go through daily tasks, and start to kind of live a functional life again, it became very important for me to set goals. And what I'm going to do over the next few minutes is talk about short-term and long-term goals, what they are, what they look like, a few examples of some good ones for recovery. Obviously, you can plug in whatever works for you. And then I'm going to talk about long-term goals. Basically, I'm going to break it down, and I'm going to use an acronym that I was taught throughout my years of recovery to help you guys work through your goals. Setting goals seems like it should be an easy task, but it's one of the things that when I talk to my clients about that they struggle with the most. So what I encourage them to think about when setting an initial goal is, what is important to you? What do you hope to accomplish? And what do you hope to get out of your life? So obviously when you look at those 3 questions, in those questions there's going to be some short-term goals and some long-term goals. And short-term goals are pretty simple. They're goals that can be achieved over a short period of time. So I always tell my clients, when it comes to short-term goals, maybe they can be things like attending an AA meeting this week, making your next appointment with your addictions counselor, getting out for a walk today, reading something recovery related today, things like that, things that are obviously achieved over a short period of time. And I think it's important to remember with any goal to make sure that when you're setting goals that they're realistic and achievable. So I always encourage my clients not to be afraid to set short-term goals. And you can set quite a few short-term goals throughout a day or a week or whatever. But what I really encourage you to remember is that short-term goals, the nice thing about them is that I find with my short-term goals anyways, is that if a lot of times if I don't achieve that short-term goal on that day, it can be bumped to the next day. What I often do is I set a list and I prioritize my short-term goals. Number 1's the most important, number 10 is the least important, and then I kind of give myself a brief little timeline on when I want to get through these goals by, and I find that way, if I get 3 done the first day and there's a list of 10, I kind of give myself a little time to get through the other 10 if I choose to use a week, for example, for a timeline. And then if I only get 1 done the next day, I don't sweat it as much. It's important to remember with goals that it's a goal. It's not the end of the world if you don't accomplish it. So it's short-term goals. They're a little easier to pick. They're a little easier to set. But what I always tend to do with myself and with my client is I encourage people, especially when I meet with clients for the first time, to set 3 long-term goals, 3 goals that you really want to achieve over a long period of time. And if that seems like too much to them, then I'll back down to just 1. But I like the clients to for sure, and myself, to for sure have 1 long-term goal. So I'm going to explain to you now what long-term goals look like. A long-term goal obviously is exactly what it sounds like. It's a goal set over a longer term. It's usually, as I mentioned, short-term goals are things like attending a meeting today. Usually a long-term goal has a much bigger objective. Some examples of long-term goals can be going to school, saving money for a vacation, stuff like that. For the purpose of our recovery videos today, though, the long-term goal that I'm going to talk about is going to be sobriety. With long-term goals, I encourage clients to use an acronym I learned a long time ago. It's the acronym SMART. And what SMART stands for is specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and then some people say timely or on a timeline. And it can be either one, whatever you prefer. So what if we're using sobriety as an example, what I would say to a client is what do you want specifically about sobriety? And maybe they want to completely abstain from alcohol. So there's two very specific things. You're completely abstaining, which means you're not using at all, and you're abstaining from one specific substance, and that's alcohol. So that's a very specific goal. So I ask, when you're setting goals, use that. Make sure you're specific about them. Don't be vague. Set one specific goal. Don't say I want to save money. Say I want to save $5,000. You see what I mean when I'm talking about specific? I think it's very important that we make our goals specific. The M in the SMART acronym stands for measurable. And for anyone who's struggled with any sorts of substance use disorders or addictions, often we measure things in time. And this is a great way to do it, especially if you're quitting alcohol, crystal meth, anything like that. We know that going through recovery, it can be a minute thing, it can be an hour thing, it can be a day thing, month thing, year thing. And I think that that's a great way to measure your recovery is by time. And I also think that, there's many different ways of doing the measurable piece. If you were aiming for a harm reduction piece and you drank 40 ounces a day and you wanted to use the harm reduction piece, you could say that by the end of the first week you wanted to be drinking 30 ounces a day. By the end of week number 2 you wanted to be down to 20 ounces a day. By the end of week number 3 down to 10, and you could taper this right off to 0. And this is a really great way to use the measurable piece of goals. The next letter in the acronym is A, and what the A stands for, at least in mine anyways, is achievable. And I think this is an important part of one. We don't want to set ourselves up for failure. So when we set out to accomplish a goal, it's very important that we make this an achievable goal. When it comes to the substance use disorder piece, there's so many difficulties, so many struggles, so many things along the way. But I'm living proof that it can be achieved. So I encourage you guys, when you set this goal, realize that it is an achievable goal, and just don't be unrealistic about it. Don't set goals that you can't accomplish. Don't set tasks for yourself that you can't accomplish. Set little things to help you be successful and make this goal achievable throughout the whole time you're doing it. A good example of this is using some short-term goals to make this achievable. Using things like Alcoholics Anonymous, using things like day programs, using things like supports with your friends, using things like, staying away from certain people, places, and things. These are all little goals that can make the big goal more achievable. The R stands for realistic. And I think we need to always set realistic goals. For me, I remember when I first started my journey through recovery, I was using cocaine, alcohol, and tobacco. And those were my drugs of choice. And alcohol was the primary one, and cocaine and tobacco were close seconds. And I remember my doctor told me, don't worry about the cigarettes. Pick the worst two right off the bat. Quit the cocaine and the alcohol, and then worry about the cigarettes. This made my goal more realistic. You can't put unrealistic expectations on yourself. You can't expect miracles overnight. Make sure when you're setting your goals that you set things that are realistic. Don't set a goal, part of your goal to be of recovery, to be going to Betty Ford Clinic that costs $52,000 if you don't have $52,000. It's not realistic. You're not going to achieve that. It's not attainable. So it's so important that when we remain realistic about things. I have clients that will say, I'm $40,000, and I thought this myself. I was like $75,000 in debt when I quit using, and I thought, I can get this cleared up over a year. That's not a realistic goal. So make sure, as part of your goal for your recovery from alcohol and quit using, that they're realistic. Whatever goals you set, make sure they're realistic. And the T part stands for timeline, timely, a matter of time, however you want to. It kind of goes with the measurable piece, except it kind of puts an end game perspective on your long-term goal. So with recovery from a substance use disorder, I would set a long-term goal to me would maybe be 6 months of recovery. That way you can stay in the specific, the measurable, the achievable, the realistic, the timely. I'm 9 years sober, and I don't know that I feel confident with where I'm at, but I never get cocky. So for me to say the timeline for sobriety should be the rest of your life, that would be contradicting the whole long road of recovery thing. I don't know that there's a journey to this recovery piece. So maybe when you're setting big goals like that for time, maybe set 6 months, 3 months. When I first got to Teen Challenge program, my goal was to be 3 months sober. And that's a big goal. When you're entering in sobriety, to make the 30-day mark, the 60-day mark, the 90-day mark, all huge goals. So, when we talk about long-term and short-term goals, long-term doesn't have to mean like 10 years. It can mean a month. A month is a long time to stay sober for. Anybody that celebrates 7 days of sobriety, 7 hours of sobriety, in my mind, is a hero. If you're trying to get through that and you're making those goals, they seem, especially sobriety, that seems like a long time. So set your long-term goals. I can give you some other examples. On a timeline, maybe you want to go on a trip, maybe you want to do it in a year. So that's when I set my goal to finish school. It had an end point. It had a time. I knew that by June 5th of 2019, I was going to have to be finished my school. So there's the timeline, right? The time is just to kind of make sure you don't set open-ended goals that have no... I see a lot of people that start projects, myself included, and leave them wide open. And it's like, well, just get to it when you get to it. And often it never gets done. So if you want to have success with those long-term goals, I think it's important to put that end date, that timeline, that time frame, whatever you want to look at it like that. And here's the most important part, and the thing that I want everyone to remember about goals, is that sometimes you set a goal, you go through the SMART acronym, you have everything set up perfectly, and it just doesn't work out. Something complicates things. I'm going to use an example of sobriety. I'll have clients that set the goal to be 4 months sober, and they'll get to the 3-month part and they'll have one little slip, and they'll think their goal's over. They can't achieve their goal. Why? I never understood this whole thing. I never understood this whole attitude of this all or nothing with sobriety attitude. If you had $100 and you lost one, would you throw the other 99 out? If you go for 3 months and you have one slip, get back up, brush yourself off, and keep going. If you figure out 3 months is 90 days, 1 day out of 90, figure out what that percentage is. It's probably like 98%. If you got a 98% on a test, you'd be super pumped. So don't let one little flaw in your goal completely throw off the whole thing. Just sometimes you have to change dates. Sometimes you have to change end games. I've wanted to have my poetry book done. I wanted it done on Valentine's Day. Then I wanted it done at the end of spring. And now it's looking like I don't know if I'm going to hit the end of spring. But you know what? Sometimes you push things back. You don't give up on the goal. You keep moving forward. You get up, brush yourself off. If you drove 3/4 of the way from Toronto to Saskatoon and got a flat tire, you wouldn't turn around and go back to Toronto. You'd change your tire and keep going. It's important to remember this stuff. It's important to remember that a goal is just that. It's a goal. If you don't necessarily accomplish it in the exact timeline, in the exact amount of time, with the exact road you were planning on traveling, don't worry about it. Just keep moving forward. Eventually you'll get to where you need to be. So I guess to wrap this up, to kind of give you the Coles Notes version of this whole thing, it's important. It's important to schedule stuff, but it's also important to remember that your schedules don't define you. I look at schedules like setting a bunch of short-term goals all in one day. So, like I said, have your schedule, set it up however it looks best for you. If you have some downtime, have something that may cause you to think, oh, some unhealthy thoughts. Make sure you have some plans to fill in that space. But don't let that schedule overtake you. Don't become addicted to your schedule. As far as goals and planning, I mean, it's so important to have goals, but it's also so important to remember that our goals don't define us. And if we fail, failures lead to successes. Nobody's ever been successful without having failures along the way. So if your goal doesn't work out, stop, reassess your goal, look at it, go through your acronym, reset it, and do it all over again. This video was called Setting Ourselves Up for Success. And I think if you plug all the formulas of your life into some of the stuff that I gave you in this video, you will be successful.